This book is just fascinating. I wasn't 2 pages into it before I was moved to tears. And it also made me ready to act on that, renewing my CPR and getting that wilderness first responder that I've been meaning to do for 2 decades. And it's all because you have decided to tell this story about human behavior under pressure. Brad, what inspired it?
It started basically with the Frank Nagel story that's in the book, and it's actually titled Uncle Frank. And so for many years ago, in 1994, I was part of Frank's resuscitation, and Frank post resuscitation lived for another 25 years. And through some incredible circumstances, I was able to stay connected to his family, and I'll let you read about it in the book. And because of that, I got to see this incredible arc of time of Frank's life after he was resuscitated, and then what that truly meant not only to him but also to his family. And that was and then I would tell that story. So we're here at our school, National Medical Education and Training Center, where we teach EMTs and paramedics, and we have students from all over the country and around the globe that come to our school here. And I would teach at every graduation. I would tell the Frank story in a talk that I termed, "What does it mean to save a life?" And that really became the beginning of this story, and then how it came about after.
Mm. Wow. And Kiera, you are Brad's daughter and you grew up. We know that your dad was really passionate about this work because he raised you knowing how to do CPR and other things. Was there ever a point where you were like, Dad, just be normal. Let me be normal.
I don't really think so. I grew up around the school and around EMS education, and we joke around now, but it was really my reality when I was 8 years old and I had gone to my parents and I said, I want to become CPR certified. And they put me through the course, and I made those CPR baby mannequins, my baby dolls. I named them all. I would set them up. I'd have tea parties with them, and that was my normal. So I don't think I ever wished for anybody, for my parents to raise me normally, because I didn't know anything else. And even looking back, I wouldn't want that. I had an amazing childhood, and it shaped me to be the person I am today.
Wow. Well, I'm sure those CPR babies were very grateful that you resuscitated them and then invited them to the tea party.
Yes, they
Uh,
were.
which actually brings me to this question. The book is actually titled The Saved Effect. Can one of you explain what that actually means to you and where did the idea for the book come from?
So it was originally my dad's idea for the book because of that story with Uncle Frank. But when he had come to me, I had been in college. I was finishing up last year and preparing myself for graduation. And he had pitched the book to me 5 times, and I turned him down all 5 times. And on the fifth time, he said, "Please just go back and sit with this idea." And so I said, "Okay, fine." I went back to my dorm room and I really just sat with the fact my plan after college was always to go and to do something clinically. And I wanted to save lives. That's what I prepared my whole childhood for. And so I really just had this epiphany that this book could save lives. And so I had gone back to him and I said, okay, I want to do this project with you, but I'm going to have my own opinion and it's going to be 50-50. We're doing it together. And so he had a title picked out. It was Saved. And I didn't really think that encapsulated the moral theme that we wanted to portray. And so I had gone to him and I said, "Have you heard of the butterfly effect?" And he said, "No." So I briefly explained it to him. A butterfly flaps its wings in South America and causes a tornado in Texas. And he said, "Okay, what does that have to do with it?" And I said, "That's what we're trying to portray, that these small decisions that people made in their everyday life went on to have these macro effects on everybody's lives. This is the saved effect. So we're calling it the saved effect."
I think it's beautiful. It really is. But now you've opened up a can of worms for him. What was it like co-writing together as father and daughter? Did you see any of these stories differently from each other? I mean, were there times where you went, I kind of see that story, or I maybe even remember it differently. What was that process like?
Well, I think that we definitely had differencing of opinions. However, Kira's a wonderful writer, and she had a minor in writing in college. And one of the reasons I asked her to join me because I knew how powerful she could write. Part of when she was in school, her professors would invite the community to come in and listen to their oral presentations of their writing, of their writing classes. And she did more creative writing in school. And so I've done more academic writing, both from studies and publishing academic articles. And so I knew I needed help on the creative side. And I knew what a powerful writer she was. And that's why I went to her and I said, can you help? Can you help with this? So there were many times throughout the book that, we would, and most of the stories that I wrote in the book were ones that were actually I was involved in. There were a few that I wasn't, but more so that I was involved in. And the other stories that we curated for the book, Kiera wrote those. However, that doesn't mean that she didn't read my stuff and come to me and say, oh, I don't think you should shape it this way. I don't think you should say this. Oh, and Lynn, as you read the book, right, in the beginning, we talk about me being at Carver's Pond with my son, Colin. I remember Kiera coming to me saying, you need to put me on the shore. You need to make sure that I can understand what it felt like, what the sun was like, what it was doing, what the water looked like. I was like, because I had never done descriptive writing like that before, not in that way. And Kiera really helped me with that. And that was very powerful for us.
It's interesting that you say that, Brad, because as I was reading it, I thought, these guys are really good writers. Good to know it's your daughter.
Yes, I give her credit. It was a great journey, honestly. It's been an amazing time for the two of us. And yeah, it wasn't always rose-colored glasses. There were some knockdown, drag 'em out fights. No, I don't mean that. I'm just teasing. But we definitely had, differences of opinion. And I think that's what, we had a close relationship her whole life. And this just strengthened that bond.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be able to have a dad who welcomes the pushback and welcomes the difference of opinions. I'm a very strong personality, and I tend to get that from him too. So, but I think that it really has been a wonderful experience, and to be able to do it with my dad is something that I will cherish forever.
Yeah. Wow, what a gift. If you're just joining us on Cool Science Radio, we're speaking with Kiera Newbury along with her father, Brad Newbury, and they have written a book called The Saved Effect. And it's true stories of lives reclaimed by people who were willing to act. Okay, so let's talk about human nature. Let's talk about how we all would like to think that we are that person that would jump in and we would have grace under pressure and we would do the right thing. But you start the story off with just a fascinating story about little 8-year-old Madeline, whose family all looked at her and couldn't do anything. I don't know if they were untrained or paralyzed or what it was. Kiera, could you talk about that?
Absolutely. Madeline's story is one that really has sat with me throughout this entire journey. I think that it's because I see myself a lot in Madeline, and I was 8 years old when I was trained, and she was 8 years old when she realized that the training and the willingness to act coincides to make great differences in the world. And so, like you were saying, she was 8 years old and she wanted to be independent, cut her own steak, and it became lodged in her airway. And she recounts it so vividly that she stood up and looked at every person in the world who loved her most, and not a single one of them could save her life. And that is because they weren't trained and they didn't have the knowledge to do what she needed to be done. So a nurse had come over and very, very quietly and calmly had approached them and said, let's try this. Performed the Heimlich maneuver on her, was able to dislodge the piece of steak. But what we really wanted to hone in on in this book was the fact that Madeline went on to then in high school open up a chapter of the American Red Cross. She went into her community, pitched the idea to a local bank and the local restaurant group. They had funded her community vices, and she then went into all of the restaurants and trained all of the wait staff and the chefs how to perform the Heimlich maneuver and how to do CPR. And her mission was really driven on the fact that she didn't want what happened to her to happen to anybody else. And then she went on to work with Senator Bruce Tarr, a Massachusetts senator, to change legislature and to make CPR certification class is a graduation requirement for high schools. And we just got word that she's going to Harvard in the fall. And we can't even conceptualize how many lives Madeline will touch and go on to save, indirectly and directly, because her life was saved.
Wow. I'm so impressed with the stories of hope in this book. And they're incredible that it is the butterfly effect, if you think about it, but at a much more dramatic level. And Brad, this question's for you. I'm curious because after 40 years on the job, how do you personally process the ones that maybe didn't go the way you had hoped, and alongside the ones that did? But how do you balance that?
I've talked about this often, particularly to our students too, as well, is that, my experiences in fire and EMS have been not just spanning 40 years, but I've been in very busy systems where we see a high volume of a plethora of problems. And I always rationalize it to myself. And my dad actually was incredibly helpful for me along the way. My dad was a Special Forces Marine. He has his own story in the book. And Lynn, if you haven't got to that one yet, get the box of tissues. But and really, I rationalize it to myself. If I've done everything clinically right to save that life, and I've worked to ensure that I have the knowledge, skill, and ability to be there when that moment arises, right? So that the experiences, and I rationalize it that it wasn't my fault. It was just my problem. And too many folks, especially in fire and EMS and first response, and in the emergency room too as well, suffer from this post-traumatic stress because of the challenges that we face every day. And it is a big challenge in our world. We wrote this book, actually, it had two big themes behind it. One was to inspire people to get them trained in CPR and be ready and willing to act, that person who has never been trained. But on the other side, too, it was also written, and it was very cathartic for me as a first responder to connect my why back to why we do what we do every single day. And I think those were the important parts of that.
In my youth, I was an EMT back in my first freshman year of college, and then went on to become a lifeguard. And during my training, we had a terrible experience on Christmas Day. A young man in his late 30s didn't make it. Just, and every Christmas I still think about that. I had really not much to do with it, but boy, did it stick with me. And I'm happy to report that the rest of my entire career as an EMT and lifeguard went smoothly. I had no trauma, no real emergencies, but there is, at least back then, there was a culture in EMS and firefighting of staying emotionally detached and just sucking up and moving on to the next call. How did that shape some of the stories that you chose to tell in this book?
I think that was a culture that I grew up in for sure. And Kiera and I've talked about this a lot because really what we want to do is ensure that the next generation of providers doesn't have that same type of mentality that we had of pushing everything down, holding it all in, because there is a factor there that there's going to be a release somewhere. And I've seen, I've seen it take people's lives in suicide. So we do have a suicide rate in fire and EMS. And I've also seen it come out in different ways, manifest itself in things like alcoholism and also too, we want to keep people as healthy as possible mentally so that they can continue to serve. And so I think those are tools, and we start to see, from a critical incident stress management today versus say 20 years ago looks drastically different. And also the treatments for post-traumatic stress is a lot different now than it ever has been.
Wow, that's really interesting. Kiera, how would you say, your dad talked about how things were as he's been going. Scott was talking about it, decades ago. What is it like now for you in your generation? You're what, 23 now?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the difference now with the kind of the emotional detachment or attachment, or how do you deal?
It's extremely different. Two complete sides of the spectrum. I mean, now we have these protocols and different things put in place to do our best to prevent the worst outcomes and to keep the health and the well-being of our emergency medical professionals just all around great, because we're the people who's taking care of those emergencies. And just from a protocols perspective, like you had mentioned, the critical incident management systems where we have licensed therapists and mental health workers, and where they specify in EMS and police and fire, they come into the departments when they have a call that is really affecting everybody. Or I think the biggest thing too has been the culture. Like you mentioned, it was the culture back in the day to just kind of put it aside and emotionally detach. And today we have shifted so much already, and it's still evolving, but it's okay to not be okay. And we all know that. And we all are looking out for each other, partners on the ambulance and people on the groups of the firehouse. They all are feeling the need to go and advocate for the well-being of the people that they work with, because they know that it could be them. So.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into, we're talking a little bit about emotional skills here, but let's talk about life-saving skill. We talk about knowing where the AEDs are in your town, and we talk about how everyone needs to know CPR. But Brad, what would you say is the number one skill that you need to have?
I think it's the awareness. It's awareness of not only, it's the awareness of the system. And it's the chain of events, and the chain, it really, in the American Heart Association, they really unpack that chain, the chain of survival. And it takes a village. If you look at a number of the stories in our book, all of them started with the recognition that someone was having some type of critical emergency. The person collapsed. Somebody stepped forward and started and recognized that they weren't breathing, didn't have a pulse. They started CPR. Someone dialed 911. Someone ran off to get an AED. And whether it was in many places now, they're ubiquitous, right? You see them in concert halls and gyms, and are here in our business. They're everywhere. And so if you don't, you should be aware when you're walking into a building, do you see those kinds of things? Also, too, stop the bleed kits are also out there too as well. And so I think that it's that recognition that emergency happened, and then what happens later. But it also is, I think you have to see yourself as the person that will act. And that starts long before. Kiera and I created a video around that. Will you be the one? And do you see yourself as that person that does have the ability to help? And really, that's where that bystander effect begins to happen, and something that Kiera talks about eloquently about the bystander effect. So I think it's important that those pieces, that chain, stays unbroken. And really what we want to do is fill the gap time. So when someone collapses, there's a time between that person hitting the floor or becoming unresponsive, no pulse, and the time that first responders, fire and EMS, show up. And for every minute that CPR is not being performed, the chance of survivability goes down by at least 10%. And if the gap's too wide, we'll never have a chance to save that person.
All right. So maybe for the person who's never been in a life or death situation, what is it you want them to take away from this book about just being willing to act, maybe to overcome that hesitation? I know a lot of people, by the way, are afraid of doing the wrong thing, right? So there's a little bit of hesitation there. But what do you want them to do? What is the key to just overcoming that hesitation and jumping into act?
I think that my dad had mentioned it. It's your awareness of the bystander effect, of the fact that the more people that are around, the less likely anybody is to act. And so when you're in a situation where somebody's having a medical emergency, the idea of you seeing yourself to be the one to step forward, then you already have a jump over everybody else. You never know how you're going to react in an emergency situation, but you can picture yourself in it. And then once you're in that, now you have that experience and that memory of, okay, I've been here before in my mind. I can now execute what I have already thought before I was here.
So the one takeaway is, even if you're surrounded by other people, don't hesitate to step forward.
Absolutely. And if you're not
Fantastic.
surrounded by anybody, it's even more of a reason to step forward.
It is a remarkable thing to call upon other people to act. And like you said, again, I got to keep going back to that butterfly effect. If they just act, um, I guess one other quick question I have then is, how do you find the families down the road? How do you sort of catalog the effect, the saved effect?
We were so fortunate that you had so many experiences and so many connections that you were able to get in touch with everybody. And from my perspective, we curated the stories that my dad wasn't directly a part of through news articles and other avenues, mainly connections. But I had a wonderful call yesterday with an organization that actually connects survivors with EMS professionals, and it's called Universe Juice. So if there are any survivors who want to be connected and thank an EMS professional, then I would say to head to that website, Google it, and I'm sure there are other organizations out there too.
Yeah.
That's so nice. Before we let you go, I want to ask you about CPR. I don't know when it changed what you do, but I took CPR through high school and college, and I haven't taken it since. And I heard that it has changed. The protocol has changed, and I wonder if that affects some people. Like they say, "Oh, I'm trained in CPR, but it's not the current CPR." What's the difference, and what would you have to say about that, Brad?
Well, I think that there's really two teachings, one for the healthcare professional and then one for the person who is not a healthcare professional. And those individuals, we hope they do something, meaning that hands-only CPR is what's being taught, doing compressions hard and fast. And that we know that just that makes an incredible difference in the outcome of a patient. So really the message is, first and foremost, Kiera and I say it all the time. One of the biggest fears around acting is, I don't want to hurt the person. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not the one that should do this. First and foremost, you can't hurt someone who is dead. You can't hurt dead people, right? So if you do nothing, the outcome of that patient is 100% they're not coming back. But if you act, even if you did, and there are things that happen when you do compressions. You will feel, and we really talk about that in the book. And Kiera actually unpacks her first experience doing CPR and what that felt like, right? So the body resists, and you'll feel that resistance, but you have to overcome the resistance. And you may break a rib, you may break some cartilage, but that's actually okay. You're not going to hurt that person. All you're doing is trying to save their life. And so it's better to act, and even if it's not correct. And also too, if you're not sure, call 911. First, you should be calling 911 anyway. So dial 911. In most systems around our country today, the dispatcher will help you and give you instructions over the phone to do CPR. So if you didn't even have training, you've never done that before, I think it's important that you call 911, start fire and EMS on the way, and then the dispatcher will ask you a bunch of questions and be able to walk you through those compressions if you don't know. So Lynn, I know in the back of your head, you've been trained in CPR. Don't hesitate for 1 second to just go in and start compressions and not stop.
It's great advice. It's a wonderful story. I haven't read it all. I can't wait to read the rest of the stories. The book is The Saved Effect, True Stories of Lives Reclaimed by People Who Were Willing to Act. And our guests today are Brad Newbury and his daughter, Kiera Newbury. And it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Yes, it's our pleasure. Thank you for
so
helping
much.
us get our message out